this is going to be as engrossing as it can get. So let me take the privilege to invite our panelists on stage, Mr. Ravi Shankar Bal, Ms. Sumedha Oja, Mr. Ravi Shankar Atayat, and Ms. Priya Kapoor. Can we have a huge round of applause for all of them? Mr. Ravi Shankar Bal is a Bangla novelist and short story writer with over 15 novels, 5 short story collection, 1 volume of poetry, 1 volume of literary essays to his credit. His novel, The Biography of Midnight, won the West Bengal government's Sutapa Roy Chaudhary Memorial Prize. His novel, Dozakhnama, won the West Bengal government's Bankim Chandra Smriti Puraskar, the highest award given by the state government for fiction. Ms. Sumedha V. Oja was born in modern Patna, which was also the capital of the ancient kingdom of the Mauryans, and she has appropriately gone back to her roots for her first book, Unnabhi, a Mauryan tale of espionage, adventure, and seduction. She is currently working on her second book, also on the Mauryans, and researching a long-term project for a series of books on the many kingdoms and dynasties of ancient India. Mr. Ravi Shankar Atayat is an Indian author and cartoonist. His first cartoon appeared in Link. He worked for Indian Express on a contract basis and as a staff cartoonist of India Today, and he became the deputy editor of India Today. In 1996, he published his first book of short stories, The Scream of the Dragonflies. He's now a columnist and the executive editor of the New Indian Express, based in New Delhi. Ms. Priya Kapoor has completed 12 years in publishing, 2 of which were in Routledge, London, and the last decade at Rowley Books, where she's currently the editorial director. During her years at Rowley Books, she has commissioned and edited bestsellers such as Dongri to Dubai by Hussain Zaidi and award-winning books such as Taj Mahal Foxtrot by Naresh Fernandez and Made for Maharajas by Amin Jafar. She has also done photo research for books such as The Nehrus, Polo in India, and Made for Maharajas. I would now request Ms. Priya Kapoor to take it forward from here. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. I hope you're still having fun. This is the last session of the Lit Fest. And I'm really happy that this is about historical fiction for 2 reasons. One is because the end of the last session went very well into our session. And the second because we're here in Orissa, which is a state so rich in language and literature and storytelling. So history is all about stories, and who doesn't love a good story? Through historical fiction, readers are allowed to be submerged into another world, a world that they know so little about, and yet they can imagine, through the help of the writers who are recreating the world, what people looked like, how they spoke, what societies were like. And not surprisingly, historical fiction has been a popular genre in India. With a history so vast and so rich to borrow from, writers are spoiled for choice. But have we done enough? Have we really used the entire canvas that is available to us to be able to write these interesting stories? We'll come back to this question later, but before that, I'll just introduce the 3 panelists and the writers here who have adopted history as their canvas. Sumedha left the Indian bureaucracy to become a full-time writer, and more importantly, spent time researching ancient Indian history and classical Sanskrit literature. Her first book, Unnabhi, is about a woman who's a spy in the Mauryan kingdom. And there are 2 stories I just want to share with you about Sumedha's book. Earlier today, we were in the session about writing for the visual media. Mr. Swaroop said that books become films after they've sold 1 million copies. In this case, I just want to tell you, and I'm a publisher, so I know this story, that before the book was published, and this is her first book, we sent it out to a scout in Bombay who was looking for a period drama to convert into a film or a TV series. And before the book was published, the book has already been optioned for a film and TV series, which is a really big deal for a debut novelist. And it also goes to show that a good story does sell. It doesn't need to first make its mark as a bestseller book to be able to translate into a good film. The second, very quickly, I want to share with you, because again, the last panel was talking about how do authors get published and find publishers. Sumedha's manuscript was actually sent to me via somebody who I've never met on Facebook. We were part of the same group about a group called the Rare Book Society of India. We had similar interests. And he told me, why don't you read these 3 chapters that this lady that I know has written. We read the chapters, we loved it, we sent her a contract. All of this was done on the internet without meeting her. So the point of the story, which I'm trying to share, is that for anyone who's writing a book, all you need to do is to just be true to your story, write a good book, you will find a publisher. Moving on, we've got Ravi Shankar Bal, who's a Bangla novelist and has written a delightful book called Dozaknama, which is essentially a conversation between Urdu literary legends Manto and Ghalib, who lived in two very different but also troubled times. The book is as much about the lives of these two poets as it is about the times they lived in. It's also a story about storytelling in India, and it's filled with love, jealousy, magic realism, and it makes for a delightful read. And finally, we've got Ravi Shankar Ethet, who's been a political cartoonist for over 30 years and has also written 3 novels. He used history and the past extensively in his first novel, Tiger by the Sea, which he will tell us about later. So, Sumedha, if I can ask you to first read from your book, and then you can tell us a little bit about your process as well.
Thank you, Priya. Am I audible? Okay. I think I will start with giving you a small flavor of the book. The book is set in the Mauryan period at the time when Chandragupta Maurya has just ascended to the throne, and the various processes which have to take place before he can become the uncrowned king of the subcontinent have just started. The web of deceit has been put in place. The spies are coming in from all across the country, and this is when the protagonist, her name is Mr. Casey and she is a dancer, meets Chanakya, the ultimate, the master puppeteer of them all. It will just give you a flavor of the book, after which I will speak some more on the way I've thought, on the way I've written, and some of the things which were important to me while writing this book. So this is chapter 1 of the book. And this is after Mr. Casey, the heroine, has come to Chandragupta's Rajyabhishek to dance. And what happens after the dance? Mr. Casey retired to the palace room that had been specially arranged for her. She lay back on the low wooden bed and reached for the polished black clay pot which held cool water. There was some gur beside it, and she absently crumbled it between her fingers. Her next move was to look for Chanakya in the huge wooden palace complex. He had not been present at the dance performance. She had no idea where to look for him. So she goes to look for him. And she goes to the assembly hall, the Sabhagriha. Continuing with the book, the approach to the Sabhagriha was through the open quadrangle at the front of the palace complex. It was a bare, functional apartment with an austere majesty and gravitas of its own. The throne, set on an elevated platform reached by 4 steps, dominated the room. 6 wooden chairs in 2 rows were set before the throne. With the dissolution of the Nand Mantri Parishad and the sole appointment of Katyayan, there were no ministers to sit with the Samrat and advise him on affairs of the state. The Sabhagriha was waiting, expectant and empty. Ordinarily, the artist in Mr. Casey would have been captivated and stunned by the paintings on the walls. Almond-eyed beauties in attendance on a handsome and godlike king. All aspects of courtly activities displayed in loving and precise detail. Creative freedom and imagination were in full flight. The brush strokes were masterly and revealed their oneness with the sculpting on the wooden pillars and wooden window embrasures. She then meets Chanakya. And let me describe the meeting to you. As Mr. Casey looked around, she saw a small door behind the throne platform. There was a little earthen lamp alight in the room as flickering shadows fell across the throne. She pushed at the door, but a voice made her halt in her tracks. "Come in, Mr. Casey. I have been expecting you, my daughter." In front of her was a short, spare figure with stern eyes and the mien of an ascetic. The voice had so much affection and understanding that tears sprang unbidden to her eyes. Was this the greedy, grasping, and cunning villain she had sworn to kill? This thin and careworn old man with just a coarse dhoti around his waist, sitting on a grass mat surrounded by bundles of bhojpat. "Come in and sit in front of me. You and I have much to talk of." Apart from giving you a flavor of what the book is like, what I have read out I will refer back to it while talking about the way I write to exemplify how I have treated sources, how I have looked at various things in an effort to present as real a picture of the Mauryan period as possible. Because for me, the only thing I wanted to do while writing this book was to tell a story. To tell a story, to bring the past back to you in front of you in the most captivating, illuminating, and real colors possible. When I looked at the topic for today's panel discussion, the historical fiction writer as a chronicler, the first thing that struck me that at least what I did was not write a chronicle, because a chronicle is something which is value-free, which is written at the same time as the events are happening almost, and which is just a chronological idea of whatever is happening in that state or that kingdom. But for me, and I think for a lot of historical fiction writers, the whole point is that we shine a light on the past. We shine a light from a certain angle. The scene that comes to us is as a result of the light, the place where we have chosen to shine it, and all the things that come through when we look at something. We cannot divorce it from our own place, our own value system, our own biases, etc. So the historical fiction writer can really never be a chronicler in the strict sense. There is too much of herself or himself in the book. And then, of course, there is the whole question of other chroniclers who have gone before us. For me, I have sourced a lot of my book from writings in Sanskrit. Now, I do not read Sanskrit perfectly. I read it very, very imperfectly. I have to take help of Hindi translations, and I'm in the process of learning Sanskrit. But even my imperfect knowledge has opened up such a vast world in front of me. And there have been so many people who have gone before us, and in the case of India, of course, somebody was asking why are we stuck with the epics and why are we looking at them. I think exactly the opposite. I think we haven't looked at the epics enough. Whatever we have looked at, I mean, perhaps Ramanand Sagar may have looked at it, but have we looked at it? Have we read it? Have we gone back to the richness, the wonderful stories, the morals, for example, also, of course, which are there in it? I feel it is, we haven't done enough of it. I have, therefore, looked at a lot of, say, for example, the Mahabharata. It is the ultimate Itihas Puran. It is the ultimate fountain of history for us, for the Indian subcontinent. And then you take, say, something like even the Katha Sarit Sagar. The Katha Sarit Sagar is actually a 10th century Sanskrit play written by Somdev, but is based on a 6th century BC book called Bad Kaha, which was written in Paishachi Prakrit. For me to understand what society was like at that time, I have been reading the Katha Sarit Sagar. Not much to my dismay in Sanskrit, but I'm reading an English translation made in 10 volumes. The stories over there are fascinating. It is the stories which bring to light different facets of the past that I would like to understand, recreate today. Not as something which is the dead past, but as somebody said in the last panel, something which is the living past. Something which is there with us every day, which is, for us, history is not the post-mortem of a dead body. For us, it's a living, breathing organism. We live it, we enjoy it, we understand it, and the minute we start thinking of it as dead and something which we look back to, I think the whole importance and the whole charm of that is lost. So I have gone on, I am standing on the shoulders of chroniclers who have gone before. Not just Sanskrit, we have for my book, for example, Greek sources. We have the ultimate chronicler for India, Megasthenes, who was the ambassador from Chandragupta's court, to Chandragupta's court from Seleucus Nicator. And he had left extensive descriptions in the Indica, which is of course lost. Megasthenes' Indica is lost, but we have Arrian and Strabo's writings based on Megasthenes' Indica, and I have referred extensively to them. The other thing which I have found is very important for me has been to read plays as history, to read plays as a source of understanding of the past. And I have done that very, very deeply. In fact, my book in a way could be called the sequel to one 5th century play called The Mudra Rakshas by Vishak Dutt, because I have, my book starts where that play ends, and it has a lot of characters which are borrowed from the Mudra Rakshas. Apart from actually borrowing characters, when you read a play, the entire society comes to life in front of you, and you can then understand people really well and understand how they were in that period of time, and then to see if it has any resonance with our current age. I mean, can we hold hands across centuries? Can we lock a gaze with somebody across centuries? That for me is the thrill of writing history. That is why I do it. And reading plays is an important aspect of it. The other aspects, apart from the formal history books, which I did read, of course, which you have to read if you're writing historical fiction, I have also looked at sculpture, painting, art, music, and the little bit that I read to you, the reason why I read it was that it exemplifies a lot of my sources. You have the characters which I've taken from Sanskrit plays. You have the description of the paintings and the sculpture, which again, I have taken partly from Ajanta paintings and partly from the extant Mauryan sculptures, although a lot of Mauryan work was in wood, so it's been lost and we don't have it today. What we have is mostly what was built by Ashok at Sanchi. But looking at those sculptures, looking at paintings, trying to make a picture which you can see. My method of writing is more like seeing a film in my mind, filling in the pictures and the colors and the gestures with my own historical research, refining that movie, so to speak, tweaking it, perfecting it, and when I'm happy with that movie, I just write it down. So that is why perhaps what Priya said was that the person who's bought the film and TV rights thought that it was already very visually rich and she wouldn't have to do too much work on that aspect. That's because, well, I have already seen that movie in my mind. It's just that now, of course, now somebody else is going to make it. But I have already seen that movie in my mind. So this is the way my processes have worked, and this is the way I have seen history. I have it's also a fact that history is a contentious subject. History is something which no two people will agree with. I'm sure after our discussion starts in a while, you will not catch us all agreeing with each other. I'm sure we have very widely differing views on it. That's because it's something we are trying to recreate. It's not something fixed. There are no historical facts. Everything is as somebody interpreted it. What we write as authors of historical fiction is our interpretation. And of course, the book Urnabhi is my interpretation of the Mauryan Empire. I call myself the self-appointed ambassador from Chandragupta's court to 21st century India, because I want that court to be brought in front of everyone. So whether I have been successful at it or not, of course, after you read the book and get back to me, I'll know only after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sumedha. We'll come back to some of the things you said about process and method after. Can I ask you to read now, Rabi Shankar, would you like to read from your book?
I think the author is not a chronicler of history. He or she is an invader in history. And I will explain this after reading some portions from my novel Dojoknama. It was originally written in Bengali and translated by Arunabh Sinha in English. It is a time span of this novel is 200 years of Indian history, and two landmarks are 1857 and 1947. Two main characters are Mirza Ghalib and Sadat Hasan Manto, who were conversing from their grave in Delhi and Lahore. And there are a lot of common persons in this novel. I will read from the chapter 9, where Ghalib first enters Delhi from Agra. And he encounters some spirits here who were buried in the ground when the Delhi was Delhi was on the making. I'm reading from. In 1637, Emperor Shah Jahan went away to Delhi. Then began the work of building Shah Jahanabad. Emperor Shah Jahan had asked for a site to be identified somewhere between Agra and Lahore. The spot by the Jamuna was finalized for the purpose. You do know that a horoscope was drawn up for the city. Astrologers had determined the correct moment to begin. Construction was started on May 12, 1639. The story I am about to tell you, Manto Bhai, is the story of the beginning before this beginning. How a city gradually grows on a foundation of the dead, the same dead people whose spirits had surrounded me that night. I was standing before Qila-e-Mualla after my arrival in Delhi. There was no moon in the sky. The fortress appeared to be a gigantic ghost, and I felt people gathering around me. Their breaths rank with the stench of rotting flesh. Asad, someone called me out. You know, Ghalib was called Asad. I looked around but couldn't see anyone. I had arrived in Delhi very recently. Who could possibly know me hereabouts? Who are you? I asked apprehensively. Qutub. But I don't know you. Where are you? Why can't I see you? We cannot be seen, Asad. Why? They have wiped us out. Who? Those who are building Shahjahanabad. They had handpicked us. And then they killed and buried the whole lot of us. It is on that ground that Shahjahanabad stands today. Why were all of you killed? I didn't want to give them an inch of my land, so they got rid of me. There can be no greater crime against the emperor, they said. They branded me imprisoned in an airless gaol for days on end. So here, there is many accounts, historical accounts of building the Delhi or Shahjahanabad. But these persons, these common persons who was buried under the ground, there is no account of them. So an author gives voices to these persons who are, who are buried under the ground. And in this sense, I think he is not a chronicler of history. He is innovator in the history. He digs up the other voices from the grand narrative of the history.
Thank you. Ravi, would you like to speak now?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind speaking there. Is that right?
Sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, I thought that all literary festivals, you ask me questions, now let me ask you some questions. I'm trying to put history in context. You know, the context is very important in history. Can I have a volunteer, any one of you? You? All right, can you come here? Thank you. What's your name? Who are you? Now. All right, come on stage. It's not a problem. All right, who are you?
My name is Varun. It's Varun Sahu.
Varun what?
Varun Sahu.
Sahu? All right, so where are you from?
I'm from basically Raipur. My father's working in Raipur.
You're from Raipur?
Yeah.
All right. And who's your father?
Yes, sir.
Who's your father? Your brother? Who's your father? Your brother?
I don't get it.
Who is your father? Who is your brother?
He's an HR head.
All right.
Okay.
So where do you come from? Which state do you come from?
I'm basically Odia. We are from here. Our house is in what we call it, Jagat Singhpur.
Okay.
It's close to there.
So you are Sahu
Yeah.
from Raipur
Yeah.
in Orissa,
Yeah.
which means you are from Orissa from, sorry?
We
Oh, okay.
live in
You're from
Chhattisgarh. We
Chhattisgarh,
belong to Odisha.
Okay, so you're from Chhattisgarh, which
Yeah.
means you are from India, which means you're from the world, right?
Yeah, well, definitely.
So now
Yes,
that
sir.
is your context, right? You are Sahu, who is from Chhattisgarh, who is from India, who is from the world, right? Thank you. So that is your context,
pretty good.
right?
Thank you.
Now, what I'm trying to say is that history is completely immaterial without individual context. I mean, it doesn't make sense. Now, you know, the Mahabharata, there's no record, written records as far as I know. As far as I know, there were two tribes, the Kauravas and the Pandavas, who really didn't like each other, I think. And the wealth of a tribe or a country was known by the cattle they had. So I guess the Pandavas had more cattle than the Kauravas, so the Kauravas decided to kind of say, okay, we're going across and getting some of their cattle. So the war over cattle was where the legend began. From the legend, it became a myth. Because here is this seer telling this blind king about this huge battle, you know, the thunder of chariots and, you know, magical weapons being thrown about. And, you know, the murder and massacre of kings, brothers, friends. And where does it all end? From legend to myth to philosophy, the greatest treatise of philosophy India's ever got, that the Bhagavad Gita. So history is a parenthesis between legend and philosophy. So it is very difficult to kind of make history relevant without the context. So now, after the Mahabharata, what comes? Rome. Now, can you tell me what happened to the last Roman emperor? Can you tell me who was the last Roman emperor? His name was Augustus. He was a boy king. He was 11 years old. And when he died, he was found hiding in a haystack. So when you think about the death of the Roman emperor, the last Roman emperor who was a little boy, what comes to mind is Rome. You know, the Rome of Caesar, the Rome of Augustus, the madman Nero. I mean, the Rome is what comes to your mind. So that is history vis-a-vis us individuals' personal history. So when you're talking about narrative, what has happened? Why has modern history, historical novels shrunk so much? Because I don't think people have the time to read them anymore. I was having a discussion with somebody the other day at who has the time to read 8,000 pages of War and Peace. Who's got the time to kind of look at 5 volumes of Proust? So we live in times which are very truncated. We live in times of instant gratification. So unless we listen to history, unless we listen to the footfalls of history, which are kind of going softly past us, we may miss the story. That's all I got to say.
Hello? Just going from there, I mean, you said that nobody has time to read such large books, but I mean, both Ravi Shankar and Sumedha's books are very steeped in history. They're very well researched. They are historical fiction. They're not that big. So there is, I think, as a publisher, a market for it. What is lacking, of course, is a choice in what we're reading. In terms of what we were talking about earlier, the expanse of this canvas that we have of Indian history, why is it that we're not hearing more about, for example, contemporary history? When you look at World War II or you look at the Holocaust, every year, in fact, there are movies and books that come out. Why is it that we've not done the same thing for example, for the partition? Sumedha, do you have any thoughts on this?
I have really thought very strongly about this. This is one of the reasons why I turned to writing on the modern period. Of course, to an extent, the modern period chose me because I have always lived and breathed it. But on the other hand, I have always felt that it has not got its due. The modern empire is the first empire of the subcontinent. It unified the entire subcontinent from Afghanistan to Madurai and from Bangladesh to Saurashtra. How come nobody is interested in it? How come nobody no Indian writer in English thought about writing on the modern period? And you have a plethora of books on the Mughals, more than a plethora of books on the colonial period. Is it that we have been conditioned by our Eurocentrism to think of only those periods as important when either the people who invaded us, they thought that that period was important. The Brits ruled India, that period was important. They took over from the Mughals, so they thought the Mughals were important. I feel that there's a lot of, as I had mentioned in my own opening statement, It's people's values. It's a consensus in society which makes authors pick up certain periods and ignore others. Let me share another personal anecdote with you. I started researching and writing this book in 2006, and believe you me, for the next 4 years, people laughed at me. Who on earth is going to read about Chandragupta Maurya? Who cares about him, and why are you wasting your time? So please write about the diaspora. Try and copy Jhumpa Lahiri. You know, this is the kind of advice I got. I don't agree with it at all. And I went on, and it's today 2014. I found a publisher who thinks like me, and she has made the book I imagined into a reality, and perhaps an even more beautiful reality than I had thought of it as. Because perhaps she's not set in the, fixed in the same trap as other people. But interests today, I feel, are changing because society is awake. India is awakening to itself. It's taking an interest in itself, looking at its own past through its own eyes. Perhaps, Priya, the reason why all this has been happening is that we have been too used to being the other, even for ourselves. We have looked at ourselves through the eyes of people who think of us as aliens. It's only now that we are, I think, awakening to think of ourselves as ourselves. So perhaps that's one of the reasons.
How did you choose your topics when you were writing?
You see, my process of writing is different because I cannot choose a period and make a period piece out of it. I start from an image or a character whom I love. That is how I loved Ghalib. And I wanted to delve into the life, situation, psyche, and the struggle of Ghalib with the declining Mughal dynasty as a poet. And then it started in 2006. I started reading various books, taking notes, and many drafts are written. Then suddenly the novel was changed because then I was started to read Sadat Hasan Manto again. And I came to know that Sadat Hasan Manto wrote a script on Mirza Ghalib which was filmed. And Mirza Ghalib was played by Bharat Bhushan, and the courtesan was played by Suraya Begum. And it was the first film which get national award. Then Manto went to Pakistan. Then I thought if I can pattern the novel as Manto liked to write a novel on Ghalib, which will be the form of it. And the whole novel changed itself. And there was the technical device that Mirza Ghalib and Sadat Hasan Manto will converse from their graves. That it started, and it took 3 years to be finalized, and it was serialized in 2009 in a Bengali newspaper, which was Bengali supplement, Sunday supplement, which was edited by eminent filmmaker Rituparna Ghosh.
Okay. So let me ask you one thing. Filmmakers, when they're making a period drama, they always say that it adds X amount of money when they're dealing with history or that kind of production. When you're dealing with history, does it add months to your research or to your writing, as opposed to if you were just writing a novel, which was not set against this larger historical context?
You see, there is the time span of the novel is 200 years. But there is many characters in Dojoknama who are not in this time span. There is Jalaluddin Rumi. There is poems of Rabindranath Tagore, Jivananda Das. There is a singer of 19th century Bengal, Ramniti Gupta. And
I meant to your writing, when you're writing. So if you would take 6 months to write.
And I took the freedom. I played my imagination in the historical text, and it came out of it. And there is also Kabir. Ghalib didn't meet Kabir. There is a chapter with Kabir in
that's the
Banaras.
creative license you took in your novel. When you even Manto and Ghalib talking was obviously something that you had imagined, and that was the story. Sumedha, would you like to answer?
Yeah, actually, I think I find my own style very strong. my own style very different from what he just said, because I have given myself a strict parameter within which to work. If so was society in 323 BC, then so will I write about it. I have not used any magic realism, any literary devices at all, which is why I feel that for me the attempt is merely to tell a story. Although I do find a point of resonance with him. He says that he loved Ghalib, therefore he wanted to write about him. Perhaps for me it is the same with Chanakya. Ever since I was 14 years old, I was fascinated with his persona. I heard about the Arthashastra, later I read it. So Chanakya has been a character who's had a very strong hold on my imagination for a long time. But on the other hand, I have found my plot and my writing very much circumscribed by the fact that certain things could not happen in 323 BC. Things would happen within the material surroundings as I could understand them through the sources that I have today. So I feel that that is a good contrast between the way he writes and the way I have written.
Sorry, I forgot. What is the question?
I was just talking about the process of writing. That when you're writing about history, does it take you much longer than if you were just to write a normal novel?
No, I mean, actually, there's not much of a difference. It depends on the story you're going to tell. The whole concept of writing about history itself is so confusing. You have post-Hindu history. You have pre-Hindu history. I've met a lot of writers with chips on their shoulders about Indian writing, what Indian writing should be done in a particular fashion by rejecting everything the West has. I met a lot of readers who tell me that, why are you writing in English? You should be writing in whatever your language is. But all that is, what are you doing? You're narrating history, right? I mean, India is a country which has had African prime ministers and viziers. India was a country where the Greeks ruled for a while. India was a country where the Romans and the Arabs traded with. What is this Indian narrative?
So what you're saying is that language should not be a problem.
The Indian narrative is a global narrative. I mean, Indian narrative is as global and more global than any other global narrative can even claim to be.
Okay.
So if anyone tells me that just stick to, that. There's nothing called that, it's this.
Sumedha, you want to answer?
Yeah, I just wanted to actually go back to the question you were asking about how much time it takes. Can I just read two sentences?
Let's go back to, I think this language thing is also quite interesting.
And
that,
about,
you had
I will speak about that, but I did want to say that I'm just going to read one sentence to you, and let me tell you that it took me about a month to write this sentence, and I will tell you why. This is a description of the heroine the first time she meets the hero. Mr. Casey had dressed carefully for the appointment, gone were the Kanchal Kundal earrings, the Satlari necklace, the golden mekhla, and indeed the flamboyant jewelry for each part of the body, as well as the elaborate dhamilya hairstyle in pearls and jewels, which she had worn. The crimson silk antariya, her lower garment, and the heavy gold embroidered muslin dupatta, which had enhanced her dance performance, were replaced. And so on it goes. Now for this, I had to research, this was at the beginning of when I had started writing the book. So I had to research clothes, materials, fabrics, jewelry, social context. When did a woman of that period wear X dress? When did a woman of that period wear Y dress? And this paragraph took me about a month to write. So yes, it does indeed take a much longer time. I feel that if I had been writing this book in the modern context, it would have taken me, say, about, well, maybe 5 or 10% of the time.
Do you want to, do you want to respond to what Ravi was talking about, that language should not be a problem in today's context when you're writing about history?
Well, I would love it. I mean, if it should not be, and talking about the ideal, well, yes, it should not be, but unfortunately it is. Because there are certain things which cannot be expressed in another language. There is a certain context, there's a certain rootedness, there are certain things which are, again, just not possible to express. I have had a lot of discussion. Priya is my publisher, and there's an editor who's not here. I have used a lot of Hindi and Sanskrit words. So at one point of time, we had this discussion about, is it taking away from the book? Is it irritating for people to read if they don't understand Hindi or Sanskrit? And we did a kind of edit. But there were some words which were non-negotiable for me because they just could not capture the essence of what I wanted to say. For example, if Chanakya says Saubhagyavati Bhav to the heroine, be fortunate, it sounds absolutely ridiculous and stupid. And there was no way I could translate it as, be fortunate. And there are a number of such words and such concepts which I have not changed, because they would have taken away from the heart of the story. And sometimes when I did change, because, well, we did want to maintain a balance, there was a word called Tribhangi, which is a particular pose. It's a particular dance pose. So we decided that it was too complex. So I had to write one sentence for describing the heroine as standing in a Tribhangi posture. It was so difficult. Again, I think to explain that one word, it took me a week, and I am not happy with the result with that one-liner at all. It does not convey the grace of the word Tribhangi.
So are you saying that your story is compromised because you're writing in English?
Absolutely. Absolutely. For me, that is a given.
No, but
Like
Priya made an interesting point concerning when we were discussing this. The 100 Years of Solitude was not translated from Hindi to English. It was translated from Spanish to English. Millions of words of the English language are borrowed from everywhere. For example, I don't know, there are lots of Hindi words which find a place in English. A lot of Jagannath, yeah, that's right. A lot of Spanish words, a lot of French words, a lot of them. So I don't think that English is an inclusive language which rejects every other language of the world. I mean, I haven't really heard an English language get into Hindi or Telugu. Unfortunately, fortunately, I have no clue. But the fact is that English is not inclusive at all. I said it's not an inclusive language. I mean, it does not exclude other influences from coming into it. I mean, that is, like you were talking about your, some words you said you will not. I mean, it's fine. I mean, that's what a lot of English writing is about. I mean, if you look at translations from Spanish to English or from Italian to English, they use, if they say condottieri, they use say condottieri. I mean, they did not kind of say mercenary.
But I think what Sumedha was saying was that she feels that her story as a whole is compromised because she's having to use a language which is alien to the period and the people. Am I right?
Yeah, alien to the period, the people, the ethos, the roots, the expression, the genius of that particular period. It is very much a compromise. And well, I am one of Macauley's unfortunate children. I can write better in English than I can in Hindi. I would have loved to write in Hindi, but I'm not capable of it. All I'm capable of is this, So my brain, I think, emote everything in Hindi, but I express it in English, and it leaves a lot to be desired. For me, personally, when I think of that film in my head that I was telling you about, and I read this book, there's a lot of difference between the two.
I'd like to bring you in because you write in Bangla, and both your books are being translated into English by the same translator. Do you feel that what you set out to write originally there's a discrepancy between that and what we're reading today?
In every translation, there is something is missing. But I think Odunavo has translated it very good, and in this novel there was various Urdu words and shairs, and they are in the Urdu form, and shairs are also in Urdu form and English translation. So can reader who knows Urdu, he can read it. But translation is always miss something of the original text, I think.
But it's not just books, It's not just books. A lot of people, when they see a movie, they say the book was better, or they say the movie was better, Whenever you take it to another medium, or even if you copy itself, like, for example, bytes are lost when you copy a file. I mean, it's like that. I mean, it's an exchange of energy. It's an exchange of substance. So even the movie, I don't think it's just books.
No, why I was bringing language into it is because you were writing about periods which were very, language was very defined of that period, but you've chosen obviously to express it in another language today. This is a question for all three of you. What would you like to see more of in terms of Indian historical fiction? A particular period, person from history that you don't feel that gets enough importance? Is there a particular period or person from Indian history that you feel that doesn't get enough importance or that you'd like to see more of in terms of books being written or being researched?
See, I have written another book on Jalaluddin Rumi.
That's your next book that you...
It is the next book. It has been written in Bengali also and translated by Arunavo. And it is a very distant period. It is 13th century because Jalaluddin Rumi was born in 1207. And the whole text is written by Ibn Battuta. He is telling the story of Jalaluddin Rumi. And it took a lot of research for me because I have to recreate the period of Turkey and all of this.
I, of course, feel that the period I am writing about has been completely ignored and it has been given very, very stepmotherly treatment by people. So, Priya, if you get more manuscripts on the Mauryan period, please go ahead.
What I want to see from historical fiction. Well, I like crime fiction. I read a lot of crime fiction. I read a lot of historical crime fiction. So, I wouldn't mind seeing Birbal as a detective. I wouldn't mind seeing Satyajit Ray as a detective because one of the most brilliant contemporary crime fiction, which you can say Victorian, is Cavendish's book on Oscar Wilde as a detective. It's brilliant. I mean, he has captured the style essence of Wilde. There's another one where Conan Doyle and Bram Stoker are detectives. So, why can't Birbal be a detective? I mean, I think he's very witty, he's very, very sharp. He makes a fool of the emperor all the time, and the emperor is no fool. So, I mean, this place, is so rich with characters.
Can I just say something here? I think Birbal is a good idea, but about co-opting characters and forcing them into positions which may not be appropriate for them. For example, Jane Austen is popular, so you have Jane Austen as a zombie.
In fact, there's a detective novel on Jane Austen, by the way.
Yes, of course there is, and there's so many. Death Comes to Pemberley, for example.
Yeah.
But what about, Jane Austen as a zombie? Or Abraham Lincoln as a zombie? Now, I think that's forcing historical fiction into something which it is not. So, it's a wonderful idea which has to be carried out with some circumspection and a bit of choice.
Just tell a good story, just tell a good story.
No,
why bother about all this? You've got to go around to tell the damn thing. Why we bother about maybe forcing it or not forcing it? Just tell a story, right? That's what we're doing.
No, but this also leads me to my next question, that your responsibility... Sorry.
In any period piece, you cannot return to that period originally. You, in writing, you always recreate a text. And in period piece, the evidence you get from the other texts, they are always distorted. Every time distorted. You don't know the original, what was original. So, period piece is always recreated. That is not original.
History is always reinterpreted. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That is absolutely and completely true. And it's recreated according to what me, the writer, thinks of it. So this is not the modern period as it existed, but it's the modern period as it exists in my mind, which is what I said right in the beginning, that it's a spotlight that I have been shining on a particular period from a particular angle. So I absolutely and completely agree with you that we can never go back. Therefore, there are no facts in history. There are only interpretations.
But you always see history from the contemporary.
And that is why it is interesting, because that is how it relates to us. When I write about a young woman in 323 BC, how do I relate to her? How does a young woman who reads that book, how does she relate to that person? Are there any commonalities? That's what, again, for me, that's what makes it interesting.
But I think Ravi
I want to ask my fellow writers a question, if I may. When we talk about historical, I'm just talking about popular fiction, I'm not talking about literature. I mean, do you see a difference between pop historical fiction and popular historical fiction? I mean, I'm making that that gaffer deliberately. See, I think the greatest disservice to historical fiction has been done by Dan Brown and later by Steve Berry, which is basically challenging the basic intelligence of the reader, but at the same time pandering to his desire for a cheap thrill. Then you have books which really deal only with that, you know, what you were talking about your book is. So there is a difference in approach. What I want to know is that how much does it damage the reader in terms of perceiving history?
I think this goes back to the topic of our discussion as well, the writer as a chronicler of history, that how much of it is your responsibility to stay true to historical facts, and how much is it that you were saying, adopting a character like Birbal, putting him into another context and using him as just a character to write about. Do you think about this when you're writing, that you have to stay very true because you have that responsibility to your readers?
Yeah, maybe you should use that. I mean, that's, yeah.
Because my perspective always determines it. So, which is historically true to you, that is not historically true to me. And you just use one text, and I just use another text. So there is no uniformity or uniform agreement on this historical truth, I think.
You know, while I agree with what you're saying, I feel that it's also a very dangerous tool. A writer in the end is responsible only to his or her own imagination. However, don't you think that it can go too far? To an extent, we do have a responsibility to not distort history. I get your point that there is nothing which is the absolute truth. But is there not something which we have to be faithful to? Now, if you know, for example, want to say that, well, Chanakya was the name of a dog, you can do it in terms of imagination, but it would be a ridiculous thing to write.
I'm not saying that. I agree with you. There is a duty of the writer, always duty of the writer. But there is always, I think there will be a controversy about it and argument about it. And I think this argumentation is very liveful and necessary for our discussion.
I think we've run out of time, but if there are any questions from the audience? Okay.
Hello. Good evening to all of you. My question is to Sumedha ma'am. She talked about different kinds of paintings she used in her book about writing. What about your thought on Madhubani painting? Would you like to use in future if it is needed?
I am open to using all art and music and culture in whatever I write. However, for me, remember, the period, the research, the parameters of the period I am writing about are very important. At that, I happen to be, of course, born in Patna, and I happen to be also from there. So I am very, very familiar with Madhubani paintings. But the kind of paintings which were extant in the 3rd century BC were not Madhubani paintings. They were Ajanta paintings. And in fact, I have been hugely inspired by the Ajanta paintings. My heroine is described after a particular painting in cave number 17, which is the oldest cave in the Ajanta complex. And the way in which the dresses, the hair, the clothes have been described have been used by me. So to that extent, I think your question is interesting, because you are talking about Madhubani paintings as part of the extant culture of a place which has lost its original culture completely. You don't see anything like the Ajanta paintings there at all.
Good evening to all. My question is to you, Sumedha. I want to ask you. We all know that Maurya was one of the biggest dynasty of the world, and Maurya dynasty was one of the biggest dynasty of the world, and its extent was the biggest of any Indian kingdom. So that time was a golden period of Indian history. Under its regime, India was largest. But when we go to Patna, Patliputra, which is now Patna, and Rajgiri, which is now Rajgir, which was capital at that time, we don't see any palaces or forts which we see in places where there was Magadha dynasty's capital or any other dynasty's capital, which were comparatively much smaller than that dynasty. So, but we can see some stupas which were made by Ashoka, but those stupas are also not near to Patliputra or Rajgir. So my question is, if that dynasty was so mighty, then why don't they have such old monuments like palaces or forts in their capitals?
Oh, that is because, you know, most of their construction was done in wood. And wood does not, it does not stay. It disappears. And in fact, if you go to Patna now, to a museum, it has 4 pillars of Ashoka's court. Still, parts of those pillars are maintained, and you can actually see those. But the main reason is that the things on which the art, sculpture, etc. was done were all perishable objects. Either they were leaves, or they were textiles, or it was wood, which is why most of it is gone. Only what was done in stone, most of it of Ashoka's time. Although, you know, there are some bits in Rajgir. So it's only the stone bits which have survived, which is why this reconstruction has become much more difficult for me.
I have a small observation to share with Mr. Shankar, that when we were students of history, our history professor in the first class had a word of caution that history is divided into 2 parts, historic frauds and fraudulent historians. He said in Odia language, ऐतिहासिक ठक और ठक ऐतिहासिक. So a small example he gave. अब जो चाय के कुल्हड़ मिलता है, जो लालू प्रसाद यादव के टाइम कंपलसरी हो गया था, मिट्टी का कुल्हड़ जिसमें चाय पीते हैं, आप 5-6 चाय का कुल्हड़ ले आइए, 400 फीट डीग करके उसको अंदर गाड़ दीजिए, फिर आप मरने के टाइम एक विल में लिख दीजिए कि मेरे मरने के 50 साल के बाद उसको डीग किया जाए, कुछ हिस्टोरिक फैक्ट मिलेगा. फिर निकलेगा वो 5-6 टूटा हुआ मिट्टी का कुल्हड़, और आप बोलेंगे फाइयान के टाइम में, जब औरंगजेब के टाइम में, मोहनजोदारो के टाइम में इसमें लोग स्वीट डिश खाते थे. So there are many chances history may be misinterpreted. I don't say all historians are frauds, but the writers who are chroniclers of history, they should also take into fact that the biggest difference between history and literature, in history everything is false except names and dates, and in literature everything is true except names and dates. Thank you.
So what's the question?
Hello.
Oh, okay.
That was an observation, actually.
I lost in translation, sorry.
Hello. Is there time for one last question to Ravi Shankar ji? Ravi Shankar ji said that let's write a good story, and also he talked of Dan Brown. I wonder what is the writer's perspective and what is the reader's perspective. Like the Dan Browns of the world rule today, in fact. There may be many Dan Browns out there who are less of writers and more of marketing people. And that is what is the readers lapping up.
I don't understand the question.
The Dan Browns of the world, there are many today. They are, I think, more of marketing people, as you said, they know what would be a good script for a film. And they are the ones who are ruling today. And people are also lapping it up. The readers are also lapping it up. If that is the taste of the readers, that's what it has fallen to.
No, more power to them. Absolutely more power to them. They want to make money out of it, fantastic. But what I'm saying is something else. I'm talking about the difference between pop historical fiction and real historical fiction. I mean, like what Sumedha is talking about in terms of real historical fiction. I'm talking about pop fiction. You know, there's a formula to it. And that sells and that works. I mean, that's all I was talking about.
There's one. Can you please keep it to a question, no observations, please? Thank you.
At the outset, I would like to apologize. I do not read historical fiction much, so I had hoped that the session would inform me of what it is. And I regret to state that I have now the understanding that historical fiction in itself sounds a little like an oxymoron to me. I want to know from the panel how much of historical fiction, how much of it really is history and how much of it is really fiction. I do understand that you've discussed this, but for someone who wants to read it for the first time, what should I keep in mind, and how much of it is really rooted in history, how much of it is fiction?
I'll let Sumedha answer that, but as a recommendation, I'd say please pick up their books after this as your first historical fiction.
You've asked a very important question for me. What I have written is more of history and less of fiction. That is why I've spent 7 years looking up everything, reading up everything, trying to understand everything. So it is, if I have written that a certain historical event took place, most probably it did. 95%. So it is, at least I speak only for myself. It is history. It's not fiction. So if you want to start reading this kind of historical fiction, yes, please do pick up this book. And I'm hoping this kind of, I do not subscribe to very imaginative or magically real historical fiction. I subscribe to researched historical fiction, and that is what I have written and will continue to write.
Yeah, a small PS to your question. When Alexander invaded India, I wasn't there. I don't think you were there either. When Clive came, I wasn't around. I don't think you were around either. I think when Hannibal crossed the Alps, I don't think we were around, any of us here. So there is history and there is imagination, right? You cannot have history without imagination unless you plunder the National Archives of the British Museum or something where there are records. And even records are extremely biased. How the British wrote about Indian history is completely different from what the leftists are writing about Indian history and what now the rightists are writing about. So history is written by the victors and also by the imaginative. So I rest my case.
Does that answer your question?
I have a question, ma'am. I also do write in Odia. I am a fiction writer, but I want to ask that, is it, these days we are finding that more and more fictions are coming out on mythological characters and historical characters. Is it very easy to find out the characters because they are easily identified and they are already in our psyche? So it is better that it will be identified more and it is commercially viable. Is it because of that more and more people are basing on mythological characters and historical characters other than creating characters on their own?
I can answer. Well, it's not easy to write about historical characters, so do please remove that misconception from your mind. In fact, it's much easier to create an imaginary character and do whatever you like with him or her. When I'm writing about Chanakya, I have certain parameters. I cannot go beyond those. So it's actually much more difficult to write about people who actually existed and about whom there is a great degree of research and a great degree of information available. Because at any point of time, at any fest like this, somebody can get up and ask me, but you wrote this in your book. And Chanakya never did this, or Chandragupta never did this. So I completely disagree with you. Imaginary characters are far easier. I can probably write an imaginary character book in about a month, and it's taken me 7 years to write this.
No, it's about identifying. Like you are writing on, someone is writing on Manthara, or a character like Kubja, or I read Karna's wife. I don't know in Mahabharata whether they are expanded, they are actually expressive. Karna's wife, nobody must be knowing who was Karna's wife.
There's a little bit of a difference between what we term as, erroneously term as mythology and history. Mythology gives you, as you say, identified characters along with a set of values associated with them. I am a historical fiction writer, and I do not have any such luxury. So for mythology, perhaps it may be easy, and the stories are also already given. But remember, for never about the stories, they are about the emotions that arise as a result of those stories. And the emotions that arise as a result of people treating those characters in different ways. So it's a process which has gone on for thousands of years and will go on for the future.
Thank you.
And one question more. While writing historical fictions,
But this will be the last question. We'll have to end the
In
session.
historical fictions, you write fictions basing on history. Fiction may be more or historical events may be more. History should be more or fiction should be more because your writing is mixture of history and fiction.
Sorry, what is the question?
That is my question. Whether in writing fictionary history, portion of history should be more or fiction should be more.
If you want my answer, history should be more. And that's why I think I write historical fiction, not fictional history.
Thank you. That too also I follow in Odisha.
Okay, I think that brings us to the end of the question answer session. I would now request the managing editor of the New Indian Express, Ms. Shampadhar Kamath, to please come on stage and present mementos to all our panelists here. Okay, we'll have the group picture as well, the group photograph. A group photograph. Thank you, everyone.